Today's episode, we have Hilary Gale with us. Hilary is a marketing strategist and finance copywriter who specializes in writing financial copy and content that doesn't sound like a robot wrote it, which is a very nuanced and gifted thing to have in the current age of ChatGPT and nonsense that goes on with that. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about how to control your marketing through the power of an email list. So Hilary, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Catherine. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. And I guess, where would you like to open this topic up? I think for most advisors, there's so many things that, you've got to do an email list. You've got to do events. You've got to do asking for referrals. There's so many things that you got to do's. And I think for this particular item of the email list, where would you like to kind of bite into the apple on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that, having an email list is so powerful for a lot of different reasons, but I also think it's one of the most underutilized marketing platforms by advisors.
Mhm.
Again, there's a couple different reasons for that. I think that, in order to have an email list, you still have to be showing up on other platforms to get people into the email list as well, right? So a lot of advisors are marketing on social media or with a blog or a podcast or something like that. And then having to take care of an email list just feels like one extra task that they might not have time for, right? So I guess I want to start by saying, the value of an email list is tenfold, but I also get why people are reluctant to implement it into their marketing systems.
Yeah. And maybe if we could speak to, when you are helping people with their marketing strategy, and that it's the email marketing list isn't the first piece that people interact with, but that it's that nurturing part of the sequence for clients, for people with prospective clients. Like what are things that they need to be thinking about of, the importance of getting that nurture process established through some kind of email newsletter, but also, what should they have for messaging? How frequently should they be doing this? Should they pay somebody else to do it? Should they try to write it themselves and have somebody ghostwrite, potentially ghostwrite part of it? Where would you start if you were in ground zero for somebody that wants to implement this?
Yeah. So ground zero, just getting kind of really tactical, I would just put on your website or create a landing page for someone to sign up for a newsletter. A lot of times people think, oh, I have to have this really valuable lead magnet or something that someone will download to get into my email list. And while that's totally true and can make it easier to grow your email list faster, it's not a necessary thing that you need to have, and you shouldn't let it hold you back from starting to build your email list if you're already building an audience on social platforms. Now, as for I'm going to answer a couple of your questions and then maybe ask you to repeat. People always wonder, how often should I be emailing my list? What should I talk about? Things like that. I love a weekly newsletter. For a lot of people, that is a little bit too much. So I think if you can commit to emailing them at least once a month, then you have some sort of consistent cadence going on that your subscribers can get used to. That's the most important thing. I do think that, for advisors, anything more than once a week is probably a little bit too much. People, of course, don't want to be spammed, and advisors don't want to spam their subscribers. But, the real value of an email list, because when you're marketing on social media, a lot of people aren't ready to go from consuming your social media content to booking a discovery call with you, right? That's just too big of a leap. And so having the email list, and again, this is just one benefit, is that it asks them to take the next step in a relationship with you without taking that kind of leap of faith to actually get on a Zoom call with you, which they might not be ready for, but they do still interact with you. So it does give you this mechanism almost to invite them into a deeper relationship without asking for too much too fast.
Yeah, that's great advice. Do you have recommended favorite tools for people that want to try to DIY this, of what you've seen people implement successfully for on the software side?
I do. The most important thing that you'll want to have is some sort of email marketing system. Things like MailChimp or Constant Contact or ConvertKit. Now, a lot of this will actually depend on your compliance department. There are some broker-dealers that mandate that advisors use a certain email marketing system over others. One that I've seen that's really common is Constant Contact. So I would check if you have a compliance department. I would check there first and see what they have to say. From a personal standpoint, my favorite email marketing platform is ConvertKit. So if you have that freedom to choose which one you like, I found ConvertKit to be very, very user-friendly, have a lot of capability. And my favorite thing about it is their customer service. Anytime I run into an issue or have a question about setting up, an automation or something like that, they get back to me within 24 hours and tell me they either fix it for me or they tell me exactly how to do it. And I really appreciate that about them.
Oh, that's really nice that you're not stuck. You try to not spend too much on software, but at the same time, if you're going to have to be tinkering with it all the time and not getting good support, it's like not worth the effort. That's great. And then in terms of, so people should be looking at tools, talk to your compliance, figure out what you should implement, get it posted on your website, get it posted on your social media accounts. Maybe when you post things, have a call to action to send people to it. Content. That's probably the thing that slows people down the most with doing something like this.
Yeah.
What are some practical tips you have there?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I will say, I would not recommend just taking what you're posting on social or other platforms and copy pasting that into your email newsletter. You do want the content to be different. With that said, I'm a huge fan of repurposing content. So to get into a consistent cadence, I really like if an advisor does have some sort of long form content that they're posting consistently, whether that be a podcast or a blog post or a YouTube episode or something like that, that becomes, what you're going to send in the email. And I always like to find an engaging way into that theme. So if you have a story that relates to the content of the podcast episode or the content of the YouTube video that you're going to be sending, if you have a story either from your own life that kind of leads into that, or maybe you have a story of a conversation you had with a client or something like that, that can make for really engaging emails. I always say story-based emails are the ones that get read and opened. And then by including your long form content in there, you're giving your email list subscribers, exclusive access to the other valuable content that you're creating. So it doesn't have to be anything that's totally new or unique. In fact, it shouldn't be. It should be kind of a consistent experience across your platforms for your audience. So that's how I like to think about repurposing content for emails.
That's great. And in terms of like practical tools for generating content, storing content, and then going through the process of like repurposing things and seeing what works and doing more of what works, do you have like a general strategy that you recommend people take in terms of like, where should they be storing this stuff? How often should they be checking their, click rates on things and those sorts of things? Do you have advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I like to take a very bare bones approach. So I always like to just draft my emails in Google Docs. If I have Because I have a podcast. So if I have a podcast that I want to write an email to, sometimes I will take the transcript of that podcast and I'll throw it into ChatGPT and I'll ask ChatGPT for ideas, like what are some story ideas that, could lead into this conversation that I'm going to share with my email list. So that's one way that I'll do some brainstorming and generating. As far as for checking on your click-through rates and things like that, I try not to pay too much attention to that because you can drive yourself crazy if you're looking at it. Kind of like if you look at your bank account every single day or every single week, right? When you don't need to be doing that. And so I recommend tracking on a monthly or a quarterly basis, depending on how often you're sending out emails, to see if you notice, upticks in open rates, to see if you notice, if your open rates are going down. That might say something about the subject lines that you're writing. The subject line is a super, super important part of emails, because if it's not enticing enough to get someone to open the email, no one's going to read it. So that's something to pay attention to when you're looking at open rates and things like that, or click-through rates. But yeah, I always like to say, track it on a monthly or a quarterly basis so you can see the big picture, and then you're not nitpicking every single email that you write.
That's great. And in terms of like recommendations you have around writing good subject lines, do you have any tips or tactics for that? Because I've heard the statement that, you spend 80% of your advertising dollar on the first line.
Yeah.
And I think for the emails, it's the same thing, right? It's like 80% of your effort
Yeah.
really should be going to that subject line, because that's what's going to make or break your campaign.
Totally. I have a couple tips for subject lines. First of all, when you are, opting into somebody else's newsletter or things like that, pay attention to the subject lines that you click on. And I actually like to keep a bank of subject lines of emails that I specifically click on, because that to me says, ooh, that's really good. How could I use a subject line like that in my own emails? Number two, you want to keep them really, really short, because, they get cut off. The character limit for subject lines, it should be really, really low. And I actually found recently this great free tool. I have to look up what it is.
We can always post it in the show notes afterwards.
We can post it in the show notes. Yeah, it's emailtooltester.com. And it lets you type in, your name as the sender name, your subject line, and if you're including preview text in there. And it'll show you on different types of phones, like the most recent versions of phones.
That's awesome.
If the full subject line will get shown, so that you can see, is this subject line too long? Is anyone even going to see it? Because if they're opening it on their computer, then they'll of course see it if they can open it on their phone. And that's been one of my favorite tools recently to help me make sure my subject lines are tight and concise.
That is such a good tip, because I think a lot of people, they put in so much effort into these things, but you're on a desktop interface and you have to
Right.
realize that the person viewing this is going to be looking at it on a phone.
Right.
And once you correct things for readability, you have to chop so much content or do different spacing or things like that to make it actually enjoyable for somebody to read that on
I
a little cell
do.
phone. Because
And
that's how
that's
they're
the
going to
other
engage
thing.
with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the other thing about, the content of your email also needs to be very skimmable, very scannable. And so I love within email marketing systems, if the system you're using has a phone viewer, so it can show you,
Mm,
are these big walls of text, like maybe on my Google Doc, it looked like it was 3 lines of text, but when it's on someone's phone and it's suddenly 6 lines of text, I probably
mhm.
want to break that up somehow, right? Add in more white space there to make it more skimmable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an easy thing too that you can plug into ChatGPT. If you don't want to go through and
Totally.
have to like hit space a bunch of times, you can just plug your content in and say, "Hey, can you respace this to be longer? Can you make sure sentences are staying a certain length while keeping the content?" And actually does a really good job with tasks like that, like doing just reformatting work.
Yeah. Oh, I love that tip. I haven't tried it for that yet, and I don't know why, because that's a great use of ChatGPT.
Yeah, I really love it for that. And something else that we've been implementing in our practice that I really enjoy is a tool called Notion. And
Mhm.
you're able to basically, you can save all of your information into Notion, into Pages, but then Notion on top of it has an AI tool. So once you've built a database of information, you can go in and it's like a chat GPT within the software and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing an email about this. Could you pull together content from my previously written stuff, highlighting these topics with
Mm,
this," and just kind of let you get a running start on drafting something.
yep.
But what would be your recommendations around? Because I think people have a tendency to want to just plug it into GPT and then plop it
Mhm.
onto wherever it's going to go. And what's your advice around that situation, and how much human touch should you be having
Yeah.
when using these kinds of AI tools?
Totally. Well, the first thing I'll say is I don't think it's going to be possible to get a 100% draft from ChatGPT, but there are things that you can do to get it from like a 30% draft up to maybe like a 70% draft. And what I really like to do is, for your first 5 emails or so, I would recommend writing at least your first 5 emails yourself so that it's your voice, it's your cadence, it's your style. Then I like to go into ChatGPT and say, hey, I'm going to share 5 of my emails with you. I want you to take note of the style, the format, the tone, all of that stuff. And I want you to come back to me and tell me what it is that you've found and recognized. So then I can see ChatGPT is recognizing the right things, right? And then
Hmm.
I'll say, okay, ChatGPT, now I want to write an email that's going to lead into this podcast episode. So I might drop the transcript so it knows where it's going.
Hmm.
Sorry. So it knows where it's going. And then can you help me come up with a draft in the same style as the examples that I've sent you? And then it'll usually give you something that's pretty good to work with. You're still going to have to make changes, of course, but it's pretty good, especially if you have the paid version of ChatGPT.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, this was all such good tactical tips around email marketing and particularly list maintenance and content, et cetera. If people are looking to get more information about the work that you do and how you like to engage with people, there's a couple places. First is that Hilary's got a finance marketing podcast, which will be in the show notes. There'll also be links to connect with her on LinkedIn and Monetta's company website as well. But are there other places that you'd like people to, reach out and, connect just to get to know you or?
Honestly, LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me. I'm the only one, running my LinkedIn page. I respond to all messages I get as long as they're not totally cold pitches. So
Mhm.
yeah, LinkedIn would be a great place to connect.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, it was so nice to have you on the show. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing so many just really practical tips on how to manage such a critical function in people's marketing,
Thanks.
strategy.
Thanks for having me.